Hello, 6th grade. In this video, we're going to talk about rates. A rate is a specific type of ratio that compares two quantities with different units of measure or different measurements. Okay, so for example, if Mrs. Kerniak drove 75 miles in 3 hours, in this ratio, we're comparing the numbers 75 to 3, but we're comparing 75 miles to 3 hours. So because we're comparing two different units of measure, miles is a unit of length compared to hours, which is a unit of time, then this is known as a rate. So we would say her rate of travel was 75 miles per every 3 hours, or we could write that in a different ratio form, 75 miles to every 3 hours. Another example of a rate, if Mr. Yance typed a 15-character text message in 5 seconds, then his rate would be 15 characters every 5 seconds. So 15 characters per 5 seconds. This is a rate because we're measuring one number 15 in the number of characters, and then the other number 5 in the number of seconds. This question asks, part A, at this rate, how many characters can he type in 10 seconds? Well, remember in the last unit we talked about equivalent fractions, and if I want to make fractions equivalent, then I need to make sure I multiply or divide both the numerator and denominator by the same number. So take this ratio 15 to 5 we have right here. If I want to figure out how many characters I can type in 10 seconds, I can multiply my denominator, which is currently 5 seconds, by 2 to make that 10 seconds. Well, to keep that ratio or rate equivalent, I need to also multiply the numerator by 2, and so that means that 15 times 2 becomes 30, and so I can type 30 characters in 10 seconds. The next question asks, how can you find the number of characters he typed in 1 second? So go back to the original rate, 15 characters per every 5 seconds. Just like we can multiply the denominator to get a different unit of time, 5 times 2 equals 10, I can also divide this denominator to get a different unit of time. To figure out how many characters I can type in 1 second, I can divide my denominator by itself, by 5, to make that 1 second. And then I could do the same thing to the numerator. Okay, divide that numerator by 5, and I would get 3 characters there. So this brings me to my next discussion. What is a unit rate? A unit rate is a rate that has a denominator of 1 unit. Okay, a denominator of 1 unit. So going back to the example of Mrs. Kerniak driving, if she drove 75 miles in 3 hours, how many miles did she drive in 1 hour? So if we take her rate, 75 miles per every 3 hours, and we want to figure out how many miles she drove in 1 hour, we can take that denominator, 3, and divide it by 3 to make the denominator a 1. We have to keep this rate equivalent, so we need to also divide the numerator by 3. And 75 divided by 3 is 25. So this means that Mrs. Kerniak drove 25 miles per 1 hour. And that is known as a unit rate because the denominator is equal to 1. A lot of times when we talk about speed, we talk about miles per hour, and you'll see that abbreviation MPH. If you ever see that, that just stands for miles per hour. So to sum it up, if we want to change any rate to a unit rate, we need to divide both the numerator and the denominator by the denominator. Okay, we're dividing both the numerator and the denominator by the denominator, and that makes the denominator 1. So we're going to practice this now on the back side. I've given you a few examples of rates. We're going to find the unit rates based on these rates, and then we're going to write them both in fraction and word form. So number 1 says Belinda biked 36 miles in 4 hours. So this as a rate would be 36 miles per every 4 hours. And to make this a unit rate, now I need to divide both the numerator and denominator by the denominator. So I'm dividing by 4. So the unit rate would be 9 miles for every 1 hour. 36 divided by 4 is 9, and 4 divided by 4 is 1. So this is the fraction form. And in word form, we can say Belinda biked 9 miles in 1 hour, or we could just say she biked 9 miles per hour. Number 2 says a recipe for a garden weed killer involves mixing 11 tablespoons of liquid soap with 2 quarts of water. So here, our rate is 11 tablespoons, and the abbreviation for tablespoons is just a capital T, and that's of soap per every 2 quarts of water. So to make this a unit rate, I need to divide the numerator and the denominator by 2. And so in the denominator, that gives me 1 quart of water. In the numerator, 11 divided by 2 is going to give me a improper fraction, or I could make that a decimal. And when we're dealing with rates, more often than not, a decimal is preferred. So let's do 11 divided by 2 as a decimal. We know 2 will go into 11 5 whole times. 5 times 2 is 10, so we get 5 1/2, which is equivalent to 5.5. Okay, so it would be 5.5 tablespoons of soap per every 1 quart of water. So we could say in words that the weed killer uses 5.5 tablespoons soap per every 1 quart of water. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about in this video is how to compare ratios and rates. It is often easiest to compare ratios when they are written as decimals. Okay, and a lot of times when we're comparing ratios and rates, we deal with money, and so decimals are very easy to compare. Sometimes we'll compare ratios and rates when they're in fraction format, but when they're in fraction format, you really need to have common denominators to compare two fractions. So more often than not, we'll try making our ratios and rates decimals to compare them. So here's an example of that. We have a 12-pack of Orange Crush soda that is priced at $3, and then we have a 6-pack that is priced at $1.75. And this question is asking which of those two is the better value, the 12-pack or the 6-pack. Well, to figure out which is the better value, we're going to convert both of those rates to unit rates. So we'll start with the 12-pack. So we know that a 12-pack of Orange Crush soda is priced at $3, so that means it costs $3 per every 12 cans of soda. Whenever we're writing a rate that involves money per item, the money part always goes on top and the item part goes on the bottom. Okay, so it's $3 per every 12 cans. 3 would go on top, the 12 goes on the bottom. To make this a unit rate, we need to divide by 12, the denominator. So I have 1 can on the bottom, and then in the numerator we have 3 divided by 12. So let's think about what 3 divided by 12 means. It means 3 over 12. We can make that a fraction. That fraction reduces to 1/4. And we know 1/4 as a decimal can be written as 0.25. So we don't even have to do long division for that problem. If you remember how to convert from fractions to decimals, you know we can multiply 4 by 25 to get a denominator of 100, and then the same thing to our numerator to get 25 100ths. That's how we get a decimal of 0.25. So that's how we can get our unit rate here. So that tells us that it's 25 cents. That's what 0.25 is in money terms, 25 cents per 1 can for the 12-pack of soda. Now let's go over here and do the unit rate for a 6-pack of soda. So a 6-pack is priced at $1.75. So we can say $1.75 per every 6 cans. Well, to make this a unit rate, I need to divide the denominator by 6 and do the same thing with my numerator. So I get 1 can in my denominator. Here I'm going to do some long division because my numerator is already a decimal. So I'm doing 1.75 divided by 6. Remember to line up your decimal points. 6 will go into the number 17 2 whole times. 2 times 6 is 12. And then I can bring down this other 5. 6 will go into 55 9 whole times. There I get 54. And then I can go ahead and add a 0. And because this is a money problem, I can stop once I get to 3 decimal places here. 6 will go into 10 1 whole time. And I can stop because we always round money problems to the nearest 100th place. So I'm going to look at this 9 here. I'm going to look to the right. And because this is a 1, I'm going to keep my 9 as a 9. So that tells me that 1 can of Orange Crush soda in the 6-packs is 29 cents. It's 29 cents per can here for the 6-packs if we round this correctly. So now let's compare these 2 unit rates. Okay, again, for a 12-pack, it's 25 cents per can. For a 6-pack, it's 29 cents per can. What's the better unit rate? Well, that would be the 12-pack. You're paying only 25 cents compared to 29 cents over here. So we would say that the 12-pack is the better value. Okay, if you had any questions over this video, 6th grade, make sure you have those written down so that you can ask those the next time you're in class. Until then, have a nice day. You're all wonderful people. Take care.